Good evening, everyone, those that are in attendance and those that are joining us via Zoom. And I would like to welcome you to the May Speaker Series. And our guest speaker this evening is Jonathan Kiser. And if I may, I'd like to read a little bio here, John, of you.
Please.
To let our crowd know a little bit about you. Jonathan Kiser, president of Kiser Environmental Consulting, based in Newmarket, Virginia. John has spent a lifetime pursuing his sole purpose of trying to save the planet from adverse human impacts. Jonathan has more than 40 years of professional environmental experience related to global warming, waste management, renewable energy, and other related work. He has more than 140 publications on timely environmental issues and specializes in helping clients on an international level. So his outreach is way out there. He is also an avid photographer, hiking enthusiast, expert ice skater. Now that I didn't know, Jonathan. You and Doc, I'm telling you, I don't know how you would compare.
That's
with
why
Doc.
I put that in there.
That's what I'm saying. All right. Musician and messenger of the light. Since 2011, John has published 4 books related to Walter Russell, which will serve as the foundation for his presentation this evening. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Kiser.
Thank you so much, John. Great pleasure to be here with you all. And the reason I'm here this evening is because Walter Russell inspired me to be here. And I'd like to see a show of hands, folks in the audience. How many of you have been inspired by Dr. Russell? Yes, I'm not surprised. But what does it actually mean to be inspired? And basically, by definition, to inspire means to fill someone with the urge or the ability to do something creative. And Dr. Russell certainly has done that in the past. He continues to do that, if not for any other reason than the sheer magnitude and diversity of his accomplishments. So this evening, I'm really happy to be here, as I mentioned, and I'm just basically going to tell you my inspired travels with Dr. Russell, which stem back now about 20 years or so. Many topics to cover. For those who don't know who Walter is, we'll get into that. And you see some of the other topics. The first 10 years of my involvement with Walter Russell, the lost art, Sam in the Palace. Sam Spicher is here in the audience today. And then some of the other things we'll be covering. I'd also like to give a shout out before we get underway to my dad, Dr. William Kiser, who was on Zoom. Hi, Dad. I'm so happy you could be with us because you helped inspire this whole thing as well. So, Walter who? Yes, Walter was all this and more. He's a champion ice skater, among other things. And the New York Herald Tribune called him the modern Leonardo, a Renaissance man for the 20th century. Significantly, and here we are within the university confines, the University of Science and Philosophy he established with his wife Leo. Importantly, to examine what humans are and the purpose of existence. That's the $24 million question, isn't it? One of his famous quotes is, "Genius is inherent in all of us. The key is, how do we unlock the genius within?" So, my first 10 years, it all goes back to Sam Spicher, who introduced me to Walter around the turn of the century here, the new millennium, I guess. And of course, he first shared The Man Who Tapped the Secrets in the Universe. He also introduced me to the palace up on the hill, the Swannanoa Palace on Afton Mountain nearby. And of course, Sam and Martha's personal art collection. Now, growing up in Cleveland, I was introduced to the arts by my mother and really became an art lover early on. And so I was particularly drawn to Walter's brilliant art, the paintings and the sculptures. And so that really is what hooked me in initially as to what was Walter Russell all about. I'm not going to go through all this, but he was first and foremost an artist. He did portraits commissioned by President Theodore Roosevelt for his children. He also undertook the 12 prettiest children portraits for the Ladies' Home Journal. Then, amazingly, at age 56, he started to sculpt, completing about 24 clay busts and more than 35 statues and monuments. Within 7 years, he's already being called one of the foremost sculptors in the country. He did 3 in-person busts of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And age 87, this is something to be inspired about, he started doing scientific art to depict visual representations of his cosmology. The art was on display at the Swananoa Palace near Waynesboro, which is just, we're here in Waynesboro, the palace is up on the hill. It was on display for nearly 50 years. I never got to see it within the palace, but unfortunately in 1998, when his wife passed, Walter had passed during the 1960s, the USB board decided in their infinite bad judgment not so much the problem was leaving the palace, but I was really upset to hear that they had placed the art in a non-climate controlled storage facility. That inspired me to publish the first of 4 books about Walter Russell, and that was called The Lost Art of Walter Russell. And you can see these images, which were taken from the public domain on internet, that's within the palace itself, and it must have just been beautiful to see it there. So significantly, Walter and Leo did view the artwork as the people's collection, and they desired to have it on public display for posterity. So I was completely shocked. How could something, world-class art, be just basically thrown in the dumpster? It was sort of the imagery I was thinking about. Non-climate controlled, I was really concerned about it deteriorating. And if it could happen to Russell, it could happen to anybody. That's why I was so inspired to write The Lost Art, is almost directing energy toward saving the art. We'll get more details about that a little bit later. And by the way, I don't know if you can see, but I have the books that are going to be referring to in the foreground here. And the Lost Art of Walter Russell is the first one on your left. But fast forward now about 8 years, and Sam basically inspired me to do most of this work. And he liked the idea of comparing Walter to some other well-known figures like Benjamin Franklin. And he asked a number of people to do this exercise. And I think, importantly, to help folks better understand who Walter was relative to people who the world really knows well. And in fact, so what I decided to do was add Nikola Tesla to the mix. These guys are all geniuses who maximize their creative energies. And again, it helped put Walter into the proper context. So of course, Ben Franklin, Tesla, Walter Russell. And the thing about it was I got to thinking, how do you best represent this kind of scenario that we all could relate to as individuals? And I thought, well, if you organize the book in such a way that you do it basically as a running table that's easier to digest with pictures chronologically, then not only would the information jump out at you better, but it would also serve as a guide for how we as individuals are doing or can be inspired to do, regardless of what decade of our life we're talking about. So for example, the first 10 years, Walter had early music talent, Ben, writing talent, Nikola, math. In the teens, Walter composed music. He went to art school. Ben invented the hand swim fins, so his inventor tendency started showing up. And Nikola was inspired by his mother's inventions and spoke 9 languages. It's pretty interesting. During their 20s, Walter was the director of the Twilight Club, which was a group of prominent folks in New York City who were advocating ethics and doing good unto others and so forth. So it's a very positive organization. He painted his world-famous Might of Angels painting, and then by comparison, Benjamin did Poor Richard's Almanac, And Nicola was working for Edison, which didn't end well. During their 30s, Walter was doing the children portraits, and also he was an architect. Ben was the Postmaster General of Philadelphia and invented the Franklin stove. Tesla was creating X-rays, the X-ray, and he also won the World's Fair illumination contract. So that's in their 30s. What were you all doing in your 30s? In the 40s, you can see they were all very busy. But significantly, this is when Walter experienced that 39-day illumination period when he wrote down 40,000 words and it became the Universal One. He also painted the octave wave, which is a representation of the universe. We'll see a little bit more of that later. By comparison, that's when Ben did the famous kite experiment, became the president of the University of Pennsylvania. Tesla, first modern power plant at Niagara Falls, and significantly envisioned the day of instant communication regardless of distance, weather, or location. This guy was pure genius, and he was responsible almost single-handedly for this stuff. It's unbelievable. So the book, which is the second one in front of you there, sort of does it again visually. Just there's Walter the ice skater, and just pretty interesting stuff. During their 50s, just to get through some of this a little quicker, this is when Walter did the 12-year IBM motivational speaker engagement, and he started to sculpt, as I'd mentioned. Ben invented the glass harmonica, and he charted the Gulf Stream. I mean, just crazy, varied stuff. Tesla was filing patents for the first radar units. Come the 60s, that's when Walter did the Four Freedoms. And this is interesting, too. We all don't have highs in life, we have lows. And so you'll see that Walter, during his 60s, lived in New York City alone, really a rejuvenation period. Ben, in the meantime, was representing the colonial interests in England. Tesla lived in New York City alone, fed pigeons to cope with his financial and legal struggles. Time they got into their 70s, Walter divorced his first wife. That's when he hooked up with Leo Russell, formerly known as Daisy Stebbing. And then that's when they again formed the Swananoa Palace University of Science and Philosophy. That's where it was located, at the palace. Ben was drafting the Declaration of Independence. He broke relations with his son over the American Revolution War differences, and he invented bifocals. Tesla was on the cover of Time magazine, 75. Charged particle beam weapon for national defense. So he was getting into some heavy stuff working with the government. And then finally, the twilight of their years, Walter, there's just no doubt that his wife was a huge help to him, and as a result, he was totally prolific to his last breath. He published University of Science and Philosophy newsletter warning about global warming, 1954. Here we are now, today. The planet's kaput, really. Published Atomic Suicide, railing against nuclear power. He died at the age of 92. Ben signed the U.S. Constitution, wrote anti-slavery treaties, and he passed away at 84. And Nicola was struck by a taxi in New York City, never improved his health. He passed away at 86. So that gives you an idea, again, if you break it down this way to see, these guys are very similar in many ways in their brilliance, even though they were doing a lot of very different things. They're all creative, they're all visionary, they had hard times, they were all driven to produce, and boy did they ever. So we all can learn from this, and that's inspiring. If we can't get inspired by what other people have done before, then it's our own fault. So this leads us now to Sam in the Palace and Sam's 1964 vision. So I'm going to play a little video. And hear what Sam has to say.
Okay, the first question has to be, how did I first know about Swannanoa, which in 1962 I had a very clear dream about the gardens, the palace gardens, very specifically, and a treasure that was there. And that was the beginning. And that was what quickened me to really be inspired, because here was exactly what I saw in my dream. So that was the beginning. And then after that, I was very, very wanting to meet Mrs. Russell. And I remember I made 4 trips to Swannanoa before I finally got to meet her on a Sunday afternoon, which was like a major, it was like meeting the president or whatever. I was very inspired about her, and probably prior to that, I had read The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe. And after reading The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe late at night, the next morning when I awoke, I had a very wonderful divine encounter, a baptism where the Holy Spirit came through a sealed window in the form of a white dove, which looks exactly like the dove I have out here at the house. And then when it landed behind my head, I had this encounter of baptism or total light, totally in light. I remember being taken out of my body and looking at my body from up above. And that was all part of that experience. It probably only lasted minutes at the most. And then I came back to my body, and I remember I was very disappointed that it was all over, because I thought I was actually leaving my body, but I came back to my body, and that's 40 some years, and nothing of that encounter before or since has been like that one experience. So I call that the experience of a lifetime. Walter Russell principles in The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe, learning about what we are all imbued or endowed with greatness if we just seek, ask, seek, and knock, that we can, it's unlimited what can happen. And there's 3 things that are important that about Walter Russell's life. One was that he was a producer of a prodigious amount of work, which come about because he had a purpose. He was very driven. He was a perfectionist in his work. In other words, anything we do in life, he brought up the point that we should do it in a perfect way. One of his main statements was, mediocrity is self-inflicted. Perfection is self-bestowed. That's a theme sentence of Walter Russell's life, which I think is correct. And it applies also in flying, piloting. His little book, The Man Who Tapped, is great for pilots because it's all about doing things right. With love. Love, of course, is the foundation of the Russell material. The great commandment, in simple words, was to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. So the golden rule is very much a part of the Russell material.
So Sam, why are you inspired to maintain and preserve the Swannanoa Palace and the grounds?
The palace and grounds there are sort of like the box singing tower that we visited last week in Florida. It's a central location of beauty. Walter Russell's great passion, it's in the book, was beauty, beauty in everything, to seek beauty. In all his artwork, he was a master of 5 of the fine arts, and all of his work is all about perfection in rhythm,
Nice. And so you go up to this day to preserve the beauty. Does it have a deeper meaning?
The beauty
or inspiration?
there, and also there's a presence there, Jonathan. I remember when we completed the Pergola repair recently, I got a sense of thankfulness from it. There's actually like a presence there. It's a sacred place for me. It's a sacred place, and I'm honored to be able to be a helper there. It requires a lot of work, and it's in bad repair right now, actually.
Thank you so much, Sam.
So Sam's had many experiences up at the Swannanoa Palace, and one was back in 1973. It was January, as I recall, and there was yet another vicious storm that came through on top of the mountain up there. It's pretty volatile, high winds and so forth. And there was substantial damage that was done to the Christ of the Blue Ridge statue, which is right here. I guess the original statue had a wood base, and that was destroyed, among other things. And so, almost miraculously, the weather, which had been very cold and turbulent, turned wonderful and warm enough to actually cast concrete. And Sam took advantage of it with the help of some folks, and they recast the base of the statue. And I guess I don't know if it was a Leo quote or not, but God works with you, but not for you. So you actually had to do the work, but you saw the opportunity, seized the moment, and did it, and then preserved the statue for many more years as a result. So that's inspiring. Then there was the multiple times where the pergola, which is behind the palace, needed to be painted, among other things. 50 gallons of paint each time. And it nearly collapsed in 2013. Sam shows up in the nick of time to hold up the pillar before I could just visualize it, you know. Way to go, Sam. You're the man. And so then I was giving a talk down the road at Wintergreen on a completely unrelated topic. I think it had something to do with litter. Oh, that's right, it's related. I'll get to that in a second. And I give Sam a call, and he goes, yeah, I'm up here at the pergola. And so, okay, well, I'm coming that way anyway, so I stopped by, and there's Martha with her cheerleader flag. Go, Sam, go. And I look up. I mean, this is what, 15 feet off the ground. It's definitely not safe if you fall. You're going to kill yourself probably. But here's Sam without any protective equipment, and he's spraying he's doing this, doing that, and it's just like, wow. I said, there is no way I'm getting up there. But I will take pictures, since I do that anyway. And in fact, here's 3 of them. I included the whole series in my first photography series collection book, which is number 3 on the chart there. And so that was pretty amazing to see all the different angles and really the inspiration. Sam with the Russell Spirits in 2019. And of course, then I was very blessed when Sam asked me on multiple occasions if I would come up and help him after yet another windstorm, which left debris everywhere on the grounds, and the trees were coming in the drive and so forth. And so we spent many a day, I'd say, up there and putting in some hard work, but it was good. It was very good, and then we could see the results by the end of each day, and it was really great. In fact, it was a divine labor of love, right, in 2020. And so, Sam, one of your favorite statements I come to realize is, are you a meaningful specific or a wondering generality? So each of us should ask that, and if it's the latter, then you really need to search within and try to get a purpose, I think is the point. Because we all have a reason why we're here. It's just a lot of people never figure it out. But indeed, more volunteers are needed to continue the good work up there. And so see Sam after the show, and he'll hook you up. Of course, being a trash man from way back, I do that professionally among other waste management, recycling type activities. So I'm always inspired to do a litter count and see what's what. And the Swannanoa Palace, unfortunately, is no exception. Folks have gone in there over the years and have just thrown their soda pop bottles out. Well, what have they thrown out? Well, plastic bottles, old aluminum, beer cans, hard plastic. But interesting glass. You can see that's pretty old glass, and it's been there a while. And the fact that we were with rakes and shovels and weed whackers and all that, we were uncovering this stuff. And in fact, it was published in an extensive book I put out, which is the red one. It's called Stop Trashing Our Precious Places. So what did I observe? Well, a lot of old litter buried under the hillside debris. The motorists, folks drive in, they throw their stuff out the window. They don't want to inconvenience the inside of their vehicle, God forbid. And the immediate, it's not only just doing the survey work and collecting it, but it's also trying to figure out how do you stop humans from littering. It's virtually impossible. But in the case of Swannanoa, I know that it's more on their tight wraps these days due to COVID and so forth. But a simple postage of the sign indicating that this is a litter-free zone just sort of puts the thought in the head that, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that as I'm coming up here to this revered space. And it might help, but without the sign, people will definitely do it. You have to educate people and get it close range enough to get them to think, not to do the wrong thing. Oh, and look, here are the inspired beauties at the palace. There's Sam, my wife Georgie, and Martha, my lovely cousin who's here this evening. And then there was the trip that Georgie and I took to Florida, and we made a definite decision to go way out of our way to go see the Four Freedoms that was sculpted by Walter Russell. So this gives you a proximity. Here's Jacksonville, and we were heading down south to down by Sanibel, Captiva in southwest Florida. And Lake City is really the turn point, but you have to go this direction toward Tallahassee to find Madison. This was commissioned originally by President FDR, and it was really stemming from his State of the Union address in 1941, where he made mention of the Four Freedoms. And interestingly, he felt that through art, so art is what's going to inspire the masses more than just say the single word or whatever it might be otherwise. So through art, we can be inspired. And this kind of just zooms in. It's part of a square. In fact, it's here in the square in this corner. And Georgie and I went there toward sunset, and it was kind of creepy because this seemed like a long-lost town way past its heyday, right? But it was still there. And so the sun hit it just right. It was really, really nice, as you can see from the photos I took. So he created the statue in 1941, dedicated it a couple years later in Madison Square Gardens, full house, and then rededicated it to Colin P. Kelly, who was a World War II hero, a year later. And he's from Madison, Florida, so that's why it's there. And so our trip was some 76 years later, and the statue was showing a little bit of wear around the edges, but it was still hanging in there. And so what are the Four Freedoms? Well, we have the freedom from want over here, freedom of worship, freedom of speech and expression, and then the freedom of fear with the swords. It's just a pretty amazing statue. Which then leads us to the Walter Russell Museum, or known as the Russell Museum. And this is really where the story picks up again regarding the lost art. We were having dinner one evening back in Harrisonburg, nearby town here, with Sam and Matt Presti, who is soon to be the new president of the university, Science and Philosophy. And I presented Matt with a copy of the lost art. This, speaking with Matt after the fact, he said this actually helped to motivate him to prove any who doubted that not only could the art be rescued by getting it out of storage, but also preserved and publicly displayed once again after several decades. And so his motto was, "Watch me." And he went to town with a little help from a lot of his friends. And one of them who helped a lot was Bill Cranwell, who underwrote the purchase of the beautiful Russell Museum buildings. And here you see some images as we were uncovering it and putting the museum together. 8 years after I had been inspired to sound the alarm, at least in my own way, through the publication as to how in the world could this actually happen. And that it came full circle. I was asked to help uncover the art and help put it on the wall and so forth. It was just incredibly inspiring to me and just great. And we attended the ribbon cutting open ceremony November 1, 2019. And you can see some of the folks. There's Matt. I only recognize by name a few. You know who that is? Sam and wait, is that Jeremy?
Yeah, there's Jeremy right behind you. Yeah.
So yeah, the wonders of a wide-angle lens. And the story continues, but this is still in 2019. The inspired current, John and past, Matt presidents. Of course, John is explaining the extremely sophisticated and complex octave wave, the complete wave cycle, representing all that exists in the universe. I mean, goodness grief, there's no way I can even start. And of course, there's Matt demonstrating the laws of pure gravity in a local restaurant where I think you all just ate tonight. So it was great spending time with Matt for sure. Sorry you couldn't be here tonight, Matt. And then there was this last December's holiday event with the winning ticket that I got. So I never win anything, right? I'm going to come down here for a sec. But I did get one of these tickets at the gate as we came in, and I say, sure, what the heck, you know why? And then they read off the ticket. I had the winning ticket. It was the Universal One. It's just, man, there was no luck involved with that. I was just had to give a nod to the powers that be. No luck. Which leads us into the Universal One. So I don't know how y'all would describe it, but maybe this is his ultimate work, because it basically was an entire cosmology resulting from 39 days and nights of being in an altered state and just doing a data download on the paper, handwriting it, I guess. This is the quote from Walter. "The great reason for keeping me in the light for such a long period was to write down the divine Iliad message as interpreted from the rhythms of God's thinking in an inspired language of light for the purpose of making mankind at long last know and comprehend God." It's pretty heavy. And indeed, he spent years publishing it. And then once it came out in 1926, 1,000 copies were distributed to the top scientists and universities around the world. It included new theories on the nature of matter, energy dynamics, universal laws, so expansive that it was considered a complete cosmology unto itself. So in my infinite wisdom, I decided, well, I've got some God-given abilities to take complex matters and simplify them in publication, written word. So I said, well, let me give it a shot. How hard can it be, right? Well, it was pretty hard, to say the least. But of course, it was Sam, once again, who inspired me to do it, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I said, well, there's no how I'm going to launch into this. I'm just going to hand it off to my dad. So he's down in Florida. He's retired. He can sit there and read this stuff. It's just like it's all Greek to me. But yes, Dr. William Kiser, the pioneering urologist and former chairman of the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. So he spent at least a month studying this book in depth. I looked out over the Gulf of Mexico. And just to, then I asked him what he thought, right? And so now I was back in my court. And I said, well, I'm not going to do this alone still. So I'm going to ask a guy who's a physicist, Jason Ferguson, he's a high school physics teacher, to also take a look at select portions of the universal light and get his modern day physics perspective. And so basically it reflects this document, this book, a chapter by chapter excerpt interpretation that is stated in more readily understood terms. So I didn't go chapter and verse. I said, okay, each chapter I'm going to take a segment of that, or maybe two or three if I can sort of get my head around it, and try to say it, what he's saying. And that's basically all it is. And certainly I never thought 100% accuracy would be achieved, and it definitely wasn't. But let us read together some of the key takeaways that I took away from the Universal One. It's intended to enlighten humans about how to achieve ultimate eternal life. This book, along with the wisdom of other universal messengers like Jesus, Gandhi, and the Beatles, helps humans to see the light and realize their ultimate potential as one with the universe, one with God. By freeing our minds from our bodies, we're capable of tapping into the entire range of universal light and come to realize the physical and spiritual worlds are actually one. And throughout the ages, prophets have introduced in the Bible and beyond, they've known that the lights of varying degrees. Jesus knew the light most perfectly. This is what Walter was saying, and what most of us believe, if you believe in Jesus. No one has exemplified this message of universal love better. Also, people could do great things if they unlock their God-given potential and channel it toward a better world. They can also choose to misuse their time and energy for their own short-term gains at the expense of others and the planet. You know any of those kind of people? All living creatures are units of a larger whole, breathing in a motion called oscillation, also known as the cosmic pendulum. Yin-yang, he, she. We all must use it or lose it. This is really important, whether it be our physical bodies or the sharpness of our minds. Sex, I did say sex, is another way to describe the opposite pulsations of the cosmic pendulum, with male being the initial action of force and motion. Dan, would you like to demonstrate? No, just kidding. And female being the equal responding reaction, force, and motion. So again, if you think about it, every action causes a reaction. Look at the political cycles. It's just, one tribe does one thing, and that mobilizes the other tribe to come back. It's just, in many ways, it's good, but in many ways, it's bad too, in my estimation. But we can't do anything about it because it's universal law, so just be aware of it. So Jason then weighed in on the question, from a modern physics perspective, what inspirations can still be taken from Walter Russell after all these years that he has been gone, since the early 1960s? He said this: Russell understood that everything is constantly changing and that stability is an illusion. Modern-day quantum physics, which describes the physical properties of nature at the scale of atoms and subatomic particles, deepens this truth. From a Buddhist perspective, human suffering arises from one's attachment to a particular state and our inability to accept impermanence as a facet of life. My art teacher in college said it this way: grow or die. So Dr. Kiser, hope you're still awake, Dad. Here's what he said. Some of his key takeaways before I even got a hold of the book. All of creation is reduced to about 140 elements. All elements of matter are in varying states of motion. We just talked about that. The secrets of the universe are hidden in elements, and knowledge is the key to unlocking that. God is love, and love is the ecstasy to inspire thinking in humans. By the way, my dad is 94, God bless him, and we're going to listen to what he has to say. And interestingly, I did interview him on 2/22/22, and for those who are into the numerology stuff, whatever that may mean.
I was first introduced to Walter Russell's writing by Sam Spicher and my son, Jonathan. After carefully reading The Universal One, a number of thought-provoking revelations emerged. First, that life is eternal. What is now has always been and always will be. Secondly, human existence has two phases, a physical phase and a spiritual phase. In the physical phase, we are born, we grow, achieve adulthood, begin to decline, and finally disintegrate. In the spiritual phase, however, the soul departs the body, assumes an atomic phase, a state of inertia, and we remain there until reincarnated into another human form. Throughout all of this, our soul retains good and bad experiences in our human life. If we're doing good deeds at this time, we are becoming more godlike and will return stronger in the next lifetime. Knowledge is the key to our understanding our relationship with the universe. Every brain has universal knowledge. By tapping into this knowledge, humans can overcome ignorance and become closer to God. The Universal One included many new ideas relating to physics and chemistry. Russell emphasized that everything is in motion and in balance. There are powerful positive and negative forces that keep things this way. Humans are increasingly in a position to understand natural forces through technological advancements. We have gone from thinking that the world is flat to exploring the outer reaches of our galaxy and far beyond. The Universal One also touches upon religion, indicating that Jesus has set for us the standards for the ultimate human behavior. That is to love God first and then to love one another. Walter Russell's Universal One helps us to a better understanding of our relationship with the universe. This book is very thought-provoking, is a must-read for anyone who is interested in expanding their cosmic consciousness.
Thank you, Doctor. God bless you. There's Dad up at the Castalia Trout Club, probably his favorite place to be, near Sandusky, Ohio. Of course, Matt, I had Matt weigh in too. When I published this book, Matt was the president and really wanted to ask him the tough questions. So what did Walter say about how God was initially created? Well, God expresses itself through bodies in motion that we call the universe and everything in it. You cannot put the particle, the cart, before the mind, the horse. With this knowledge, it's impossible to remove mind from creation. So therefore, mind consciousness must be God. To the degree that we know this is to the degree that we can demonstrate it in our individual lives. So it's pretty typical, certainly of my work. If you do something that's comprehensive, you want to make it a little more consolidated, even more accessible. It's just the refinement process. And so the condensed decoding of the Universal One, which is somewhere on the list there, it's all the way to the right. Yes, we're coming to the end. Was just that. It was an abbreviated, sort of refined and rearranged versions to get rid of some of the redundancy that was found in the Universal One itself, and just so that it would be easier to digest by the public. And these findings, which some of course were in the previous book, but these are a little bit different. Everything in the universe starts with God. Believing God is a separate entity from humans is incorrect. God is all things, seen and unseen, and light is the visual evidence of God's existence. Humans who effectively and purely tap deeply into their subconscious will achieve great happiness and union with God. And when humans become enlightened enough to realize that their bad actions are recorded in their souls and perpetuated forward in reincarnated state, they'll hopefully improve their behavior. Unfortunately, most people never figure that out or even care, in my opinion. More findings. To get beyond outer thinking and achieve inner thinking within God's realm, one must have the desire. And you have to connect then through deep meditation and subsequent loving actions toward all universal elements. Try that. That's a rare person. Realizing we're all one and executing universal love will bring true peace and happiness. And here's really it boils down. 3 words. Walter Russell's message. God's one message of love. Rhythmic, balanced interchange. In other words, we should spread love to others to receive an equal amount in return. A lot of folks have said it different ways. My grandfather said, bread cast upon the water returns many folds, for example. And what's Dr. Russell's take on God according to Matt Presti? Well, God is not a localizer gallivanting around the universe destined to return one day. A God particle will not be found since God is a quality of mind that can only be known, can't be measured physically. It's pretty deep, but makes some sense. So, in conclusion, anybody want to be like Walter? Let's see, almost everybody except the 2 folks in the back. Because you're really going to have to dig really deep into your soul and ask, what am I really most passionate about? What are my strengths? What makes me happy? If I had $1 million, this is what do you really want to be when you grow up? Well, if you have $1 million to give away, like I guess the guy who purchased this building, clearly a reflection of a true purpose. To spread. Yes, that's one indication. So serious, heartfelt answers to such questions will lead you to discover your true purpose. So if you really want to be like Walter, be inspired, channel your energy, get off the freaking couch and do the work. And remember, this is on Walter's grave. Mediocrity is self-inflicted. Genius is self-bestowed. Thank you so much for being a great audience.
And that is why I say that this course of lectures is to give everyone the knowledge of God's creative processes, the means He employs, the balance which He demands, the separateness of father-motherhood into fathers and mothers, which must interchange in balance in order to unite and as one. And that applies to every corpuscle of the body as well as it applies to every individual entity as a whole.